Sing, darling, or you're fired." Sterling Cross, the kind of handsome that made you clench your fists, held up the diamond. Bigger than her future. The air in Le Papillon crackled. He thought he was funny. They all did. But Cecilia knew something they didn't. This wasn't just about a job. It was about a debt. A family name dragged through the mud. 3 years she'd waited, quiet, invisible. Now this arrogant bastard was handing her a microphone. He thought he was humiliating a waitress. He had no idea he was about to unleash a storm. He thought it was a joke. The table thought it was comedy. But when Cecilia opened her mouth, the laughter didn't just stop. It died. Because the billionaire didn't know he was mocking a legend everyone thought was dead. The air inside Le Papillon, Manhattan's most exclusive dining establishment, smelled of white truffles, aged cognac, and desperation. For Cecilia Hart, the desperation was the strongest scent of all. She adjusted the collar of her starch-stiff uniform, wincing as the rough fabric rubbed against the scar on her collarbone, a hidden souvenir from a life she had buried 3 years ago. At 24, Cecilia had learned the art of becoming invisible. In a room filled with politicians, tech moguls, and trust fund heirs, a waitress was nothing more than a pair of floating hands serving Bollinger champagne and clearing away half-eaten plates of Dover sole. "Table 4 needs a refresh on the sparkling water, Cecilia, and smile for God's sake. You look like a funeral procession," the floor manager, Henri, hissed as he breezed past her, clutching a tablet. Cecilia nodded, keeping her eyes on the floor. "Yes, Henri." She moved toward table 4, her orthopedic shoes silent against the plush velvet carpet. She knew exactly who was sitting there before she even arrived. The noise radius gave them away, Sterling Cross. At 32, Sterling was the face of Cross Global, a shipping and logistics empire that practically owned the Atlantic Ocean. He was devastatingly handsome in that specifically irritating way that wealthy men often were. Dark hair swept back with careless precision, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes the color of a stormy sea that looked at everything with a mix of boredom and disdain. Tonight he was holding court, surrounded by a sycophantic entourage of friends who were really just leeches in $5,000 suits. Sterling looked like a king bored with his own kingdom. And then there was the woman next to him, Vivian St. Clair. The daughter of a media tycoon, Vivian was beautiful, sharp, and cruel. She wore a red dress that cost more than Cecilia's rent for the next 5 years, and she had a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "I'm telling you, Sterling," Vivian said, leaning into him and placing a manicured hand on his forearm. "The gala at the Met is going to be a disaster this year. The soprano they hired? A nobody. Some Russian import with no range." Sterling swirled the amber liquid in his glass, not looking at her. "I don't go for the music, Viv. I go because my mother's name is on the donor wall, and if I don't show up, the board creates a headache I don't have time for." Still, one of the other men, a hedge fund manager named Brody, chimed in. "It's about standards. The arts are dying." Cecilia approached the table, holding the chilled crystal pitcher of water. She moved to refill Vivian's glass first, adhering to the strict service protocol. "Excuse me," Cecilia murmured softly. Vivian didn't move her arm. She was too busy gesturing, creating a hazard. Cecilia waited a beat, then tried to pour from a safer angle. Just as the water began to flow, Vivian jerked her elbow back, laughing at something Brody said. Her arm collided with the pitcher in Cecilia's hand. Splash! Ice-cold water cascaded down the front of Vivian's crimson dress. The table went silent instantly. Cecilia froze, the pitcher trembling in her hand. "I am so sorry, miss." Vivian stood up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. She looked down at her soaked dress, then up at Cecilia, her eyes narrowing into slits of pure venom. "You clumsy little idiot," Vivian shrieked, her voice cutting through the ambient jazz of the restaurant. "Do you have any idea what this is? This is vintage Dior, it's silk." "I'm so sorry," Cecilia stammered, grabbing a linen napkin to dab at the mess, but Vivian slapped her hand away. "Don't touch me. You'll just make it worse with your filthy hands." The entire restaurant was watching now. Henri, the manager, was rushing over, his face pale. But Sterling Cross didn't move. He just sat there, leaning back in his chair, watching the scene unfold with a detached curiosity. like he was watching a nature documentary about predators and prey. "Sterling," Vivian whined, turning to him. "Look at what she did. She ruined the evening." Sterling finally looked up. He looked at Vivian's wet dress. Then he shifted his gaze to Cecilia. He looked her up and down, taking in the frayed cuffs of her uniform, the messy bun of auburn hair, and the terrified blue eyes that were fixed on the floor. "It's just water, Viv," Sterling said, his voice deep and smooth, carrying a hint of amusement. "It dries." "It's the principal," Vivian snapped. "She's incompetent. She shouldn't be working in a place like this. She probably belongs in a diner." Sterling looked at Cecilia again. "Is that true?" he asked, addressing her directly for the first time. "Do you belong in a diner?" Cecilia swallowed hard. She needed this job. She needed the tips to pay for her grandmother's care facility in Queens. She couldn't lose this. "No, sir," Cecilia whispered. "It was an accident. I apologize." "An accident," Sterling repeated, tasting the word. He picked up his glass of scotch. "You know, my father always said that accidents are just lack of preparation meeting opportunity." "Please, Sterling," Vivian huffed, sitting back down, blotting her dress angrily. "Don't bore us with business philosophy. Just get her fired so we can eat." Sterling smiled then. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who found a new toy. "Fired? That's too boring," Sterling said. He stood up slowly, towering over the table. He was intoxicated, not sloppy drunk, but at that dangerous level where inhibitions are gone and arrogance takes the wheel. He looked at Cecilia. "You have a voice, don't you? I heard you apologize. You have a melodic speaking voice." Cecilia frowned, confused. "Sir." Sterling reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He tossed it onto the table. It tumbled and popped open, revealing a yellow diamond ring that sparkled violently under the chandelier lights. It was a ring he had bought earlier that day, intending to propose to Vivian eventually, mostly out of family obligation, though he hadn't planned to do it tonight. "Let's make this interesting," Sterling announced, loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "Vivian says the arts are dying. She says no one has talent anymore." He walked around the table and stood mere inches from Cecilia. She could smell his cologne, sandalwood, and expensive scotch. "I'm a gambling man," Sterling said, his eyes locking onto hers. "And I'm bored. So here is the deal. You humiliated my guest. Usually that means you lose your job, but I'm feeling generous." He gestured to the pianist in the corner of the room. "Do you know Mozart?" Sterling asked. Cecilia's heart stopped. Mozart. The name echoed in her mind, unlocking a vault she had sealed tight. "I know who he is," she said carefully. "Good," Sterling laughed. "Vivian was just complaining about the Queen of the Night aria. Says it's impossible to sing correctly. Der Hölleracci. Do you know it?" Cecilia didn't answer, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Here is the offer," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, though everyone could hear him. "You sing it, right now. If you can carry the tune without making my ears bleed, I won't have you fired. In fact," he pointed to the ring on the table, "if you can hit that high F, I'll marry you." The table erupted in laughter. Brody slapped the table. Even Vivian smirked, her anger momentarily forgotten in favor of this cruel game. "Oh, Sterling, stop," Vivian giggled. "She probably listens to pop radio. She doesn't know German opera." "I'm serious," Sterling said, his eyes cold and hard, challenging Cecilia. "Sing for your supper, sweetheart. Sing this Mozart, and I'll marry you. Or walk out that door and never come back." It was a joke, a sick, power-tripping joke by a billionaire who thought people were playthings. Henri, the manager, grabbed Cecilia's arm. "Cecilia, go to the kitchen, pack your things. I'm sorry." Cecilia looked at Henri, then she looked at Vivian, who was sneering. Finally, she looked at Sterling cross. He was waiting for her to break. He wanted her to cry, to run away, to prove that she was small and he was a god. Something inside Cecilia snapped. It wasn't anger. It was an old, familiar fire that she had doused with water for 3 years. She pulled her arm away from Henri. "The Queen of the Night," Cecilia said clearly. Her voice wasn't shaking anymore. The laughter at the table died down slightly. Sterling raised an eyebrow. "You know the words?" he mocked. "I know the notes," Cecilia said. She turned to the pianist. a young man named Arthur who looked terrified. She walked over to the piano. "Key of D minor," she told Arthur. Arthur looked at Sterling for permission. Sterling waved his hand dismissively. "Play it. Let's hear the waitress screech." The restaurant fell into a hush. It was the kind of quiet that usually precedes a disaster. Patrons at other tables stopped eating, forks hovering halfway to their mouths, sensing the tension radiating from the center of the room. Cecilia stood by the piano. She didn't look like a diva. She looked like a tired servant in a polyester uniform with a stain on her apron. She closed her eyes for a second, grounding herself. "Don't do this," a voice in her head warned. "If you do this, you blow your cover. If you do this, they will find you." But the humiliation burned too hot. The way Sterling looked at her, like she was dirt on his shoe, triggered the memory of her father's bankruptcy, the shame of losing everything, the way the elite circle of New York had turned their backs on the Hart family when the money ran out. She opened her eyes. She fixed her gaze directly on Sterling Cross. Arthur struck the opening chord. Bum, 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 bum. The aggressive staccato introduction of the aria began. It was fast, furious, and technically demanding. Cecilia took a breath, not a shallow chest breath, but a deep diaphragmatic expansion that engaged her core. And then she sang, "Der Hölle Rache kocht in meinem Herzen." Hell's vengeance boils in my heart. The sound that came out of her mouth was not the voice of a waitress. It was a weapon. It was rich, resonant, and shockingly powerful. It filled the cavernous restaurant instantly, bouncing off the mahogany walls and crystal chandeliers. Sterling's smirk vanished. His hand, which had been reaching for his glass, froze in mid-air. Vivian's jaw literally dropped. Cecilia wasn't just singing, she was performing. Her posture shifted, her spine elongated. The tired slump of the service worker disappeared, replaced by the commanding presence of a trained coloratura soprano. The aria is an expression of rage, a mother commanding her daughter to kill. Cecilia poured every ounce of her frustration, her grief, and her hatred for men like Sterling into the German lyrics. Tod und Verzweiflung. Death and despair. She navigated the difficult intervals with terrifying precision. Her voice was agile, dancing over the rapid-fire notes with clarity that rivaled the best recordings Sterling had ever heard. The room was paralyzed. The kitchen staff had come out to the swinging doors, watching in awe. Henri, the manager, was clutching his tablet to his chest, his mouth open. Then came the moment of truth. The famous vocal run, the staccato arpeggios that climbed up to the stratospheric high F6. Sterling found himself holding his breath. She can't, he thought. It's impossible. Cecilia's eyes flashed. She tilted her head back slightly. Ah! She hit the notes. She didn't just hit them, she nailed them to the wall. The high F rang out like a bell, pure and crystalline, piercing the air with a frequency that seemed to vibrate in everyone's bones. It was perfect. It was flawless. It was the sound of a prodigy. She cascaded down the scale, her voice controlling the room, holding every single billionaire, politician, and socialite in the palm of her hand. When she finished the final cadence, ending on the dramatic resolving chord, she didn't bow. She didn't smile. She stood in the sudden, deafening silence, her chest heaving slightly, her eyes locked on Sterling Cross. For 10 seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. Then a single person started clapping. It was an elderly man at the back of the room, Senator Bradley. Then another. Then the whole room erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a thunderous ovation. People stood up. Sterling sat frozen. His heart was pounding against his ribs. He had grown up in the opera boxes of Vienna and Milan. He knew what he had just heard. That wasn't amateur talent. That was world-class genius. Cecilia ignored the applause. She walked back to the table, her face like stone. She picked up the pitcher of water she had dropped earlier. She placed it on the tray. Then she looked at Sterling, who was staring at her as if she were a ghost. "The aria is finished, sir," she said, her voice dropping back to its quiet speaking tone, though it now carried a steel edge. "I believe I won the bet." She didn't wait for his response. She didn't look at the diamond ring. She turned on her heel and walked toward the kitchen, walking with the grace of a queen who had just reconquered her throne. The kitchen doors swung shut behind her, cutting off the roar of the applause. Cecilia leaned against the stainless steel counter, her legs suddenly turning to jelly. She slid down to the floor, burying her face in her hands. "What have I done?" "Cecilia!" Henri came bursting through the doors. He looked frantic. "Cecilia! Who are you? Where did you learn to do that?" She looked up, panic setting in. "I have to go. Henri, I have to leave. Now." "Leave? Are you insane?" Henri waved his hands. "Mr. Cross is asking for you. He's demanding you come back to the table. He says he's serious about the ring." "I don't want the ring," Cecilia said, scrambling to her feet. She tore off her apron. "I need my paycheck, Henri. Cash out my hours, please." "Cecilia, wait. You can't just walk out on Sterling Cross." "Watch me." She grabbed her purse from her locker. She had to get out before they asked the right questions. Before someone realized that Cecilia Hart didn't exist, and that the woman who just sang was actually Cecilia Holloway, the disgraced daughter of Marcus Holloway, the opera director who had committed suicide 3 years ago after an embezzlement scandal. A scandal that Sterling Cross's father had exposed. She couldn't be near the Cross family. They were the reason she was an orphan. They were the reason she had vowed never to sing again. She ran out the back exit into the alleyway, the cool New York night air hitting her flushed face. Inside the restaurant, Sterling Cross was still sitting at table 4, staring at the empty spot where the waitress had stood. "Well," Vivian said, breaking the tension with a nervous laugh. "That was unexpected. A parlor trick. She probably learned it from YouTube." Sterling turned to Vivian slowly. "Shut up, Vivian." Vivian recoiled as if slapped. "Excuse me." "I said, shut up." Sterling stood up. He grabbed the diamond ring from the table and shoved it into his pocket. "Where is she?" Sterling demanded, grabbing a passing waiter. "I think she went to the kitchen, Mr. Cross." Sterling stormed toward the kitchen, ignoring the stares of the other patrons. He burst through the swinging doors, startling the chefs. "Where is the girl?" Sterling barked. "The soprano." Henry stepped forward, looking terrified. "She's gone, Mr. Cross. She ran out the back." "Gone?" Sterling ran a hand through his hair. "What is her name?" "Cecilia. Cecilia Hart." "Hart," Sterling repeated. The name meant nothing to him, but the voice scratched at a memory he couldn't quite place. It sounded like the recordings his mother used to play. It sounded like perfection. "Get me her file," Sterling ordered. "Address, phone number, everything." "Sir, that's private employee information. I can't." Sterling took a step closer to Henri. "I buy and sell companies before breakfast, Henri. Do not talk to me about privacy. I just proposed to that woman in front of 50 witnesses. I think that makes me family. Give me the file." Henri gulped and nodded. He hurried to the office. Sterling paced the kitchen floor. His heart was still racing. He had made the offer as a joke, a cruel taunt to put a servant in her place. But the moment she hit that high F, something in Sterling's cynical, frozen heart had cracked. He wasn't looking for a wife. He wasn't looking for love. But he was a man who collected rare and beautiful things. And he had just let the rarest thing he'd ever encountered slip through his fingers. Henry returned with a piece of paper. "Here. This is the address we have on file. It's in Queens." Sterling snatched the paper. "Tell my driver to bring the car around back, now." As Sterling strode out into the alley, he looked at the dirty pavement where she must have run. "You won't get away that easily, Cecilia," he whispered to the dark. The rain began to fall as Sterling's black Maybach navigated the potholed streets of Astoria, Queens. It was a different world from the polished avenues of Manhattan. Here the streetlights flickered ominously, and the buildings huddled together like tired old men bracing against the cold. Sterling sat in the back, an iPad glowing in his hands. He wasn't looking at stock prices. He was looking at a grainy PDF of an old obituary. Marcus Holloway, renowned opera director, dead at 52, ruled suicide. Sterling swiped to the next image. It was a photo from a gala 4 years ago. Marcus Holloway stood beaming, his arm around a young girl with auburn hair and bright, hopeful eyes. The caption read, "Director Holloway with his daughter, promising soprano Cecilia Holloway." Stop here, Sterling ordered. The driver, a burly ex-military man named Corbin, eased the car to the curb in front of a crumbling brick tenement. This is the address, sir. You want me to come up? No, stay with the car. Sterling stepped out into the rain. He didn't have an umbrella, but he didn't care. The water soaked his cashmere coat as he pushed open the rusted front door of the building. The lobby smelled of boiled cabbage and mildew. He climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, the sound of his Italian leather shoes echoing on the concrete. He reached apartment 4B. He could hear movement inside. He didn't knock. He wasn't a man who asked for permission. He pounded on the door. Cecilia, open the door. The shuffling inside stopped. Silence. I know you're in there, Sterling called out, his voice authoritative. And I know who you are, Miss Halloway. A jagged gasp was audible through the thin wood. A moment later, the chain rattled and the door cracked open. Cecilia stood there, still in her waitress uniform, though she had ripped the logo off the pocket. Her hair was wet, her eyes wide with fear. Go away, she hissed. You have no right to be here. I have every right, Sterling said, pushing the door open with his hand. He was stronger than her, and he stepped into the apartment, forcing her to step back. You have something of mine. I didn't steal anything. Cecilia backed away until she hit the small, laminate table in the center of the cramped living room. Sterling looked around. The apartment was tiny, clean, but heartbreakingly poor. In the corner, a hospital bed was set up. An elderly woman lay there, asleep, hooked up to a noisy oxygen machine. The rhythmic hiss-click of the machine was the only sound in the room. Sterling's gaze softened for a fraction of a second before hardening again. I'm not talking about theft, Cecilia. I'm talking about a deal, a verbal contract. You were drunk, she spat, keeping her voice low so as not to wake her grandmother. It was a joke. You wanted to humiliate me. I did, Sterling admitted calmly. He closed the door behind him. But then you sang, and everything changed. He walked further into the room, looking at the peeling wallpaper. Does she know? He gestured to the woman in the bed. Does your grandmother know that the prodigy of the Halloway family is serving fish to snobs to pay for her oxygen? Don't you dare talk about her. Cecilia stepped in front of him, her hands trembling. You don't know anything. Your father destroyed my family. Archibald Cross planted those stories about my father. He framed him for the embezzlement at the Met. My father killed himself because of your family. Sterling stopped. He knew his father was a ruthless shark, a man who ate competitors for sport. But hearing it said so plainly, with such raw hatred, stung. My father is a difficult man, Sterling said diplomatically, but I am not my father. You're exactly like him, Cecilia said, tears welling in her eyes. You treat people like toys. You offered to marry me as a punchline. Please, just leave. I'm packing. We're leaving tonight. Leaving? To go where? Sterling laughed humorlessly. You have a bedridden grandmother, and judging by this apartment, less than $500 to your name. Where will you go? A shelter? Cecilia looked away, biting her lip. He was right. She had nowhere to go. You're trapped, Cecilia, Sterling said, stepping closer. He could see the pulse fluttering in her neck. But I'm offering you a key. He pulled the velvet box from his pocket again. The diamond ring seemed absurd in this dim, sad room. The offer stands, Sterling said. Cecilia stared at him. You're insane. You can't be serious. I am deadly serious. Listen to me. Sterling's face lost its arrogance, replaced by a sharp, business-like intensity. My family trust has a clause. I cannot take over as chairman of Cross Global until I am married. My father put it in to control me. He wants me to marry Vivian St. Clair. If I marry Vivian, he wins. He controls me through her. Sterling took a breath. I need a wife, Cecilia, but I don't want a partner. I want a distraction. I want to shock the board. I want to bring someone into that house who terrifies them. And you... He looked at her with a mix of admiration and hunger. You terrify them. You have the talent, the pedigree, and the anger. You are the perfect weapon. I won't be your pawn, she whispered. Be my partner then, Sterling countered. 1 year. We stay married for 1 year. In exchange, I pay for everything. I move your grandmother to the best private clinic in Switzerland. Top specialists, no more rattling oxygen tanks in a Queen's walk-up. I clear your debts. And he paused, knowing this was the hook. And I give you the resources to investigate what really happened to your father. If my father framed him, I'll give you the access to prove it. Cecilia froze. The offer hung in the air, heavy and intoxicating. It was a deal with the devil, but this devil was offering her the one thing she wanted more than safety: justice. She looked at her grandmother, sleeping fitfully in the corner. She looked at the water stains on the ceiling, then she looked at the ring. 1 year? She asked, her voice barely audible. 1 year, Sterling confirmed, strictly business, no touching, no emotions, just a performance, the greatest role of your life. Cecilia took a deep breath. She reached out and took the ring box. Her fingers brushed his, and a jolt of electricity went through them both, startling them. She opened the box and slid the massive diamond onto her finger. It was heavy. It felt like a shackle. I'll do it, she said, but not for you, Sterling. I'm doing it to take your family down from the inside. Sterling smiled, a genuine, dangerous smile. I wouldn't expect anything less, Mrs. Cross. The next morning, the world exploded. Cecilia woke up, not in her lumpy bed in Queens, but in the guest suite of Sterling's penthouse overlooking Central Park. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, the pillows felt like clouds, and the silence was absolute. She sat up, clutching the duvet to her chest, disoriented. Then the memories of the night before came rushing back. The limo ride, the private ambulance taking her grandmother away to a luxury care facility in Upper East Side, the stopover before Switzerland, the signing of the non-disclosure agreement that was thick enough to be a novel. There was a knock on the door. "Enter," she croaked. A severe-looking woman in a grey suit walked in, followed by a rack of clothes being pushed by 2 assistants. "Good morning, Miss Halloway. Or should I say, the future Mrs. Cross," the woman said briskly. "I am Petra, Mr. Cross's personal assistant. We have a lot of work to do." "Where is Sterling?" Cecilia asked, swinging her legs out of bed. "Mr. Cross is handling the press," Petra said, gesturing to the large flat-screen TV on the wall. She picked up the remote and clicked it on. The screen filled with the face of a news anchor. The headline screamed, "Mystery Soprano Stuns Manhattan Elite." The video, taken by a patron at Le Papillon last night, has already garnered 4 million views, the anchor was saying. The shaky cell phone footage of Cecilia singing the Queen of the Night aria played on screen. It was blurry, but the sound was undeniable. The identity of the waitress remains unknown, but rumors are swirling that billionaire Sterling Cross was seen leaving with her. Is this a Cinderella story or something more scandalous? Cecilia stared at the screen, horrified. "They recorded it?" "Everyone records everything, my dear," Petra said, snapping her fingers at the assistants. "Now stand up. We have 3 hours before the press conference." "Press conference?" Cecilia stood up, panic rising. "Mr. Cross has announced your engagement," Petra said calmly, holding up a sleek navy blue dress. "He decided to get ahead of the story. If we hide you, they will dig. If we present you, we control the narrative." For the next 3 hours, Cecilia was scrubbed, polished, and painted. Her nails were manicured, her hair blown out into cascading auburn waves, and her waitress uniform was replaced by a wardrobe worth more than a house. When she finally looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize herself. The tired girl from Queens was gone. In her place stood a woman who looked expensive, poised, and cold. "Perfect," a deep voice said from the doorway. Cecilia turned to see Sterling leaning against the frame. He was wearing a charcoal suit, looking impeccably fresh, as if he hadn't been up all night plotting. "You look the part," he said, walking over to her. He stood behind her, looking at their reflection in the mirror. He placed his hands on her shoulders. "Are you ready?" "You didn't tell me about the press conference," Cecilia said, watching his eyes in the glass. "I didn't want you to run," Sterling replied. "Once we walk out those doors, there is no going back. You are Cecilia Halloway again. The phoenix rising from the ashes. That's the story we're selling. The prodigal daughter returns." "And what about the waitress part?" "A bohemian experiment," Sterling waved his hand. "You were finding yourself after your father's tragic death. The public loves a tortured artist." He held out his arm. "Trust me, Cecilia. I play this game better than anyone." She hesitated, then took his arm. It felt solid, like a rock. They took the private elevator down to the lobby of the Cross Global Tower. As the doors opened, the flashbulbs blinded her. It was a wall of light and noise. "Mr. Cross, is it true she's Marcus Holloway's daughter?" "Cecilia, look here." "When is the wedding?" Sterling guided her to the podium, shielding her slightly with his body. He raised a hand and the room fell silent. He had a natural command that was terrifying to behold. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling said, his voice smooth and projecting without a microphone. "Thank you for coming. I know there is a lot of speculation about the events of last night." He looked at Cecilia and smiled, a warm, loving smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I would like to introduce you to my fiancée, Cecilia Holloway. We have known each other for a long time. Last night was simply a celebration of her return to the New York stage." A reporter from the New York Times shouted, "But she was waiting tables, Mr. Cross. Why was the daughter of an opera legend serving drinks?" Sterling didn't flinch. "Because my fiancée is a woman of immense pride. She refused my help until she could prove she could stand on her own 2 feet. And I think after that performance, no one can doubt that she stands tall." It was a brilliant lie. It turned her poverty into a virtue, her struggle into a choice. The reporter turned to Cecilia. "Miss Holloway, will you be singing again? Will you return to the opera?" Cecilia leaned into the microphone. She felt Sterling's hand tighten on her waist, a warning squeeze. "I sing only for my future husband," Cecilia said, reciting the line Petra had fed her. "For now, I am focusing on our life together." The cameras flashed wildly. Sterling leaned in and kissed her on the cheek. His lips were warm, and for a second Cecilia smelled the sandalwood scent and felt a strange, confusing flutter in her chest. "It's a lie," she reminded herself. "He is the enemy." But as they walked away from the podium, hand in hand, the world cheering for the fairy tale couple, Cecilia realized she wasn't just in a cage, she was in a lion's den. And the lion was holding her hand. The Cross estate in the Hamptons was less a house and more a fortress. Built of grey stone and steel, it sat on a cliff overlooking the ocean, isolated and imposing. It was 2 weeks after the press conference. The wedding was scheduled for next month, a whirlwind timeline that the press attributed to mad passion, but was actually due to the upcoming board vote. Tonight was the engagement dinner, the first time Cecilia would meet the family. Sterling adjusted his cufflinks as they stood outside the massive oak double doors of the dining hall. He looked tense. "Listen to me," Sterling said, his voice low. "My father, Archibald, will try to rattle you. He will mention your father. He will imply you are a gold digger. He might even insult your appearance." "I can handle insults, Sterling," Cecilia said, smoothing down her emerald green silk gown. "I've been a waitress in New York for 3 years. I've heard worse than anything an old man can say." "You haven't met Archibald," Sterling said grimly, "and Vivian will be there." "Vivian?" Cecilia stiffened. "Why is your ex-girlfriend at our engagement dinner?" "Because her father owns the largest media conglomerate in the country, and Archibald is trying to merge our companies. Vivian is a fixture. Just don't let them see you bleed." "I don't bleed," Cecilia said, lifting her chin. "I sing." Sterling looked at her, and for the first time there was genuine respect in his eyes. "Good. Let's go." The doors opened. The dining room was dimly lit, illuminated by candelabras that cast long, dancing shadows against the walls. A long table sat in the center. At the head of the table sat Archibald Cross. He was 70, but looked older. He was a withered man in a wheelchair, hooked up to monitors, but his eyes were sharp, black, and alive with malice. To his right sat Vivian St. Clair, looking stunning and predatory in silver. To his left were a few board members and Archibald's younger brother, Uncle Cyrus. "Well, well," Archibald's voice rasped, sounding like dry leaves crunching. "The prodigal son returns." And he brought the singing waitress. Sterling squeezed Cecilia's hand, then let go. They walked to their seats. "Father," Sterling nodded. "This is Cecilia." "I know who she is," Archibald sneered. He didn't offer a hand. He just stared at Cecilia with X-ray intensity. "You look just like him, Marcus, weak chin, nervous eyes." Cecilia sat down gracefully, unfolding her napkin. "And you look exactly as my father described you, Mr. Cross," she said pleasantly. The table went quiet. Archibald raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And how did he describe me?" He said you were a man who knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. Cecilia lied smoothly. Her father had actually called him a soulless monster, but she needed to be diplomatic. Archibald let out a bark of laughter. Sharp tongue. I like that. Better than Vivian. Vivian just whines. Vivian flushed pink. Archibald, please. I'm right here. I see you, Viv. Archibald waved a hand. So, Cecilia, my son tells me he's going to marry you. He thinks this little stunt will secure his chairmanship. It's not a stunt, father, Sterling said, pouring himself wine. We are in love. Love, Archibald scoffed. Love is for poor people. We have interests, mergers, legacies. He turned his black eyes to Cecilia. Tell me, girl, how much is he paying you? Cecilia didn't blink. He's not paying me anything. Bullshit. Archibald slammed his frail hand on the table. Everyone has a price, especially a Halloway. Your father sold his integrity for a few $1,000s. That's why I had to crush him. Cecilia's grip on her fork tightened until her knuckles were white. This was the test. He was baiting her. He wanted her to scream, to flip the table, to prove she was unstable. She remembered Sterling's advice. Don't let them see you bleed. She took a sip of water. She set the glass down. My father, Cecilia said, her voice ice-cold and perfectly controlled, was a man of art. He made a mistake trusting the wrong partners. But he left me something you will never have, Mr. Cross. And what is that? Archibald challenged. A legacy that people actually love, she said. When you die, the stock market might dip for a day. When my father died, the entire city wept. I wonder, who will weep for you? Vivian gasped. The board members looked down at their plates. Archibald stared at her. His mouth twitched. For a moment, it looked like he was going to order his guards to throw her out. Then he smiled. A grotesque, skeletal smile. Sterling, Archibald said, not looking away from Cecilia. She's dangerous. I approve. Sterling let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He looked at Cecilia with a mixture of shock and awe. She had just looked the devil in the eye and he had blinked. However, Archibald continued, approval is one thing, proof is another. He snapped his fingers. A servant stepped forward, holding a violin case. I hear you have perfect pitch, Archibald said, a parlor trick perhaps, or true talent. I am a singer, not a violinist, Cecilia said, but a musician knows all instruments, Archibald said. Inside this case is a Stradivarius, 1715, worth about $6 million. I want you to tune it. Tune it. By ear, Archibald said. The A string is slightly flat. Fix it. If you snap the string, well, you owe me $6 million. If you fix it, you get the dessert. It was a trap. The humidity in the room, the age of the instrument, it was incredibly delicate. One wrong turn of the peg and the ancient gut string would snap, potentially cracking the bridge. Don't do it, Cecilia, Sterling said sharply. Father, this is ridiculous. I'll do it, Cecilia said. She stood up. She walked to the head of the table. She opened the case. The violin was breathtaking, the varnish glowing under the candlelight. She picked it up. She didn't use the bow. She simply plucked the A string. Ping. It was indeed flat, about a quarter tone. She reached for the peg. It was stiff. She could feel the tension in the wood. The room was silent. Vivian was watching with a cruel smile, hoping for a snap. Cecilia closed her eyes. She hummed a perfect A44 to Haz in her head. She turned the peg, once, twice. A tiny microscopic adjustment. She plucked it again. Ping. Perfect pitch. She gently placed the violin back in the case. It's tuned, she said. Archibald looked at his brother, Cyrus, who was a trained musician. Cyrus walked over, pulled out a digital tuner from his pocket, he always carried one, and plucked the string. The needle on the tuner hit dead center. Green light. Perfect, Cyrus whispered. Archibald leaned back in his chair. Well then, bring out the cake. Cecilia walked back to her seat. Her legs were trembling, but she didn't show it. As she sat down, she felt a hand under the table grip her knee. It was Sterling. He squeezed her knee hard. It wasn't sexual. It was an anchor. You're amazing, he whispered, so low only she could hear. Cecilia looked at him. For the first time, she didn't see the arrogant billionaire. She saw a man who was just as trapped in this house as she was. They were teammates in a blood sport. "We have to survive the wedding," she whispered back. "Oh, darling," Sterling smirked, his mask sliding back into place as the waiters brought the cake. "The wedding is the easy part. The honeymoon is where the real danger begins." The venue for the wedding was Sterling's idea, and it was a stroke of vindictive genius. He had rented the Metropolitan Opera House. It was the very place where Marcus Holloway had been humiliated, fired, and marched out by security 3 years ago. It was the place where the Holloway name had died. And tonight it was where Cecilia Holloway would be crowned the Queen of New York. The auditorium was packed. 4,000 guests filled the velvet seats, senators, celebrities, tech giants, and the entirety of the Cross Global Board. The stage was set, not with a painted backdrop, but with a forest of white roses and crystal candelabras. Cecilia stood in the wings, hidden from view. She wore a custom gown by Vera Wang, a masterpiece of ivory silk and lace, with a train that seemed to go on for miles. But her hands were shaking. "You look like you're about to execute a prisoner, not get married," a voice said. Cecilia turned. Sterling was standing there. He wasn't supposed to see the bride before the wedding, but Sterling Cross had never followed a rule in his life. He looked devastating in a tuxedo, his hair perfectly coiffed, but his eyes were dark with worry. "I can't breathe," Cecilia admitted, pressing a hand to her corset. "Sterling, everyone is out there. Your father, Vivian, the press. If this goes wrong, I go to prison. I'm signing a marriage license under a name I haven't legally used in 3 years. It's fraud." Sterling stepped closer, invading her personal space. He took her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "Listen to me," he said, his voice fierce. "It's not fraud. We fixed your papers this morning. You are Cecilia Holloway, and you are not alone out there." He leaned his forehead against hers. "We have the file. We have the bank records. Tonight we don't just get married. We burn them down." Cecilia looked into his stormy grey eyes. For weeks they had been planning this. Sterling had hired private investigators to dig into his own father's archives. They had found the smoking gun, unauthorized transfers from the Met's endowment fund directly into a shell company owned by Archibald Cross and Vivian's father, media mogul Richard St. Clair. They had framed Cecilia's father to cover their own theft. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Cecilia whispered. "He's your father." "He's a monster," Sterling corrected, "and you are the only real thing I've ever found." The way he said it made Cecilia's breath hitch. It wasn't part of the script. It wasn't the deal. "Sterling." "I'm breaking the contract, Cecilia," he murmured, his lips brushing hers. "I don't want a year. I want the lifetime option." Before she could respond, the orchestra began to play. Not the traditional wedding march, but the overture to the Marriage of Figaro. It was time. Sterling kissed her quickly, hard and desperate, then pulled away. "See you at the altar." He walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. Cecilia took a deep breath. She grabbed her bouquet of white orchids. She signaled the stage manager. The curtain rose. Cecilia walked out. The gasp from the audience was audible. She looked ethereal, a goddess of vengeance in white silk. As she walked down the aisle created on the stage, she locked eyes with Sterling. He was waiting for her, an anchor in the storm. But sitting in the front row, Archibald Cross watched with a reptilian stare. Next to him, Vivian St. Clair was fidgeting, checking her phone. Cecilia reached the altar. The officiant, a Supreme Court justice, began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The ceremony proceeded smoothly until the critical moment. If anyone can show just cause why this couple may not lawfully be joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The silence stretched. 1 second, 2 seconds. "I object," the voice shrieked from the front row. Vivian St. Clair stood up, clutching a manila folder. The audience gasped. Whispers erupted like wildfire. "This marriage is a sham," Vivian shouted, marching up the steps to the stage. She turned to the audience, playing to the cameras that were broadcasting live. "This woman is a fraud. Her name isn't Cecilia Holloway. She's a destitute waitress who seduced Sterling for his money. And worse, she's the daughter of a criminal." Archibald Cross remained seated, smiling smugly. This was the plan. Humiliate Sterling, destroy the girl, and force the merger. Vivian pointed a manicured finger at Cecilia. I have proof. Marcus Holloway stole millions from this very opera house. You are marrying the daughter of a thief, Sterling. The board will never accept her. If you marry her, you lose the company. The justice looked uncomfortable. Mr. Cross, perhaps we should pause. Sterling didn't look at the justice. He stepped forward, placing himself between Vivian and Cecilia. He took the microphone from the stand. Thank you, Vivian, Sterling said, his voice booming through the auditorium. I was wondering when you would interrupt. You always did have terrible timing. Vivian blinked. What? You want to talk about theft? Sterling asked. Let's talk about theft. He snapped his fingers. Behind them, the massive projection screen that was usually used for subtitles flickered to life. But it didn't show opera lyrics. It showed bank statements, Cayman Island accounts. The audience murmured in confusion. What is this? Vivian screeched. Turn it off. These, Sterling said, pointing to the screen, are the transaction records from the Metropolitan Opera House Endowment Fund from 3 years ago. You'll notice the dates coincide exactly with the dates Marcus Holloway was accused of embezzlement. The slide changed. It showed a wire transfer of $5 million. But look at the beneficiary. Sterling's voice was cold steel. It didn't go to Marcus Holloway. It went to St. Clair Media Group Holdings. The room went dead silent. Vivian's face drained of color. And here, Sterling continued, the slides changing rapidly now, showing emails and signatures, is the authorization for the transfer, signed by the chairman of the board. A massive signature appeared on the screen. Archibald Cross. Sterling turned to the front row. His father was no longer smiling. Archibald was gripping the arms of his wheelchair, his face purple with rage. My father and Richard St. Clair stole the money, Sterling announced to the stunned crowd, and when the auditors got close, they needed a scapegoat. They chose the director, Marcus Holloway. They framed an innocent man, destroyed his life, and drove him to suicide. Cecilia stepped forward, taking the microphone from Sterling. Her hand was steady now. My father died for a crime he didn't commit, she said, her voice ringing out with the same power she used for Mozart. He died because these men were greedy. I didn't come here to marry a billionaire, ladies and gentlemen. I came here to clear my name. She looked down at Archibald. You took my father. You took my home. But you will not take my dignity. Sirens began to wail in the distance, getting closer. What is going on? Archibald shouted, trying to stand up but failing. This is preposterous. I am Archibald Cross. I own this city. Not anymore, father, Sterling said calmly. I sent these files to the FBI this morning. They are waiting in the lobby. The doors to the auditorium burst open. Federal agents in windbreakers swarmed the aisles. Archibald Cross, Richard St. Clair, an agent shouted. You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The crowd erupted. Flashbulbs went insane. It was chaos. Vivian tried to run off the stage, but an agent caught her arm. Archibald was wheeled out in handcuffs, screaming obscenities at his son. On stage, in the eye of the hurricane, Sterling and Cecilia stood alone. The screen went black. The agents were clearing the front row. The ceremony was ruined. Sterling turned to Cecilia. Well, he said, loosening his tie, that was dramatic, even for an opera. Cecilia looked at him. Her eyes were full of tears, but they were tears of relief. The weight she had carried for 3 years was gone. You did it, she whispered. You actually did it. You destroyed your own family for me. I told you, Sterling said, taking her hands. I'm a gambling man. I bet on the soprano. He looked around at the chaotic scene, then back at her. So, I suppose the wedding is off. The contract is void. You have your justice. You're free. Cecilia looked at the man who had started as her tormentor and ended as her savior. She saw the vulnerability in his eyes. He expected her to leave. He expected her to walk away now that the deal was done. Cecilia smiled. She reached out and grabbed the lapels of his tuxedo. You idiot, she said affectionately. Excuse me? You promised me a year, she said, and you owe me a honeymoon. Is that a negotiation? Sterling grinned, hope flooding his face. No, Cecilia said, it's a demand. She pulled him down and kissed him. It wasn't a show for the cameras. It wasn't a strategic move. It was passionate, real, and full of a love that had bloomed in the most unlikely of places. The remaining guests, realizing the drama was over and the romance was beginning, started to cheer. The applause grew louder and louder, filling the opera house. Sterling broke the kiss, breathless. He looked at the justice, who was standing awkwardly to the side. "Your Honor!" Sterling shouted over the noise. "Skip to the end." The justice smiled. "By the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." "Way ahead of you," Sterling laughed, sweeping Cecilia into his arms and dipping her low, just like the finale of a grand ballet. Cecilia laughed, the sound pure and melodious. She had entered the room as a waitress disguised as a queen. She was leaving as a wife, a legend, and for the first time in a long time, she was truly happy. The curtain fell, but their story was just beginning. In the end, Sterling and Cecilia didn't just survive the cutthroat world of New York's elite. They rewrote the rules. Cecilia's father was posthumously exonerated, his name restored to the Metropolitan Opera House Hall of Fame. Sterling took over Cross Global, purging the board and turning the company into a legitimate empire, with Cecilia by his side, not just as a wife, but as the fiery conscience he always needed. They proved that while money can buy silence, it cannot silence a voice that is destined to be heard. The Waitress and the Billionaire learned that the greatest risk isn't betting your fortune, it's betting your heart. Wow, what a journey! From a humiliated waitress to the Queen of New York, Cecilia really showed them that you should never underestimate someone with talent and the truth on their side. Did you expect Sterling to turn on his own father like that? I honestly thought he might hesitate. If you loved that twist and want to see more stories about underdogs taking down arrogant billionaires, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. And tell me in the comments, if you were Cecilia, would you have forgiven Sterling for how he treated her at the beginning? I'm dying to know your thoughts. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.